activists, anti-poverty activists, etc. In February of 1976, Provincial Superior Bergoglio ordered them to shut down their slum parish. They refused. In March of 1976, Bergoglio kicked both of them out of the Jesuit order. He expelled them, but he did not inform them of his decision to do so. In May of 1976, commandos swarmed the headquarters of their slum parish, and they whisk off 7 of their young associates. Fathers Yorio and Jalix then go into hiding in a Jesuit residence in Buenos Aires. Bergoglio was one of the few people in the world who knew their whereabouts. In May, a few weeks later, the commandos come back and they grab Fathers Yorio and Jalix while they're having a meeting with more of their lay associates, and they grab another 6 of them as well. Fathers Yorio and Jalix spend the next 5 months being interrogated and tortured at the Navy Mechanics School. There was a public outcry because they were fairly high-profile priests. The Navy relented, and one night they took them by helicopter and dropped them off in a farmer's field north of Buenos Aires, drugged and naked. Bergoglio then about making sure that neither of the 2 of them ever got jobs again in Argentina. He circulated a rumor amongst Catholic hierarchs that the 2 of them were involved with the guerrillas. What Father Yorio heard during his detention and interrogation convinced him beyond doubt that Bergoglio had given the green light for his abduction. The Navy certainly would have discussed it in advance with Bergoglio. Yorio went to his grave accusing Bergoglio of having told Admiral Massera that Yorio was a guerrilla chief. There is a military memo which proves beyond doubt that Father Jalix's abduction was based on information provided by Bergoglio. Jalix privately and publicly accused Bergoglio of having caused his abduction. When Bergoglio becomes Pope Francis, him and his coterie put pressure to bear on Jalix to change his story. Yorio has since died. Pope Francis has a face-to-face meeting with Father Jalix at a monastery in Germany. At the end of that meeting, Father Jalix issues a statement saying that he has forgiven Pope Francis. He did not say he exonerated him. He did not say that he was not guilty of those crimes. He is saying he personally, as a Catholic, forgave him. That wasn't good enough. They had to have another meeting. At the end of that meeting, Jalix issues a statement, signs off on a statement completely exonerating Bergoglio and contradicting much of what Jalix had been saying the previous 3 decades. A criminal complaint was filed against Bergoglio, but it was dismissed for lack of evidence. Bergoglio was twice summoned as a witness in the trials of military officers. On both occasions, he invoked clerical privilege to avoid having to appear in open court. In 2005, he submitted his testimony in writing. In 2010, he picked the venue for his testimony in a giant cathedral beneath a very imposing portrait of the Virgin Mary. During those proceedings, Bergoglio answered, "I don't know," or "I can't remember," to almost every question. Prosecutors accused him of being a liar. He claims that while he was provincial superior, he kept no records of all the important meetings that he had with important people. He conceded that he'd had sit-down meetings with General Videla and Admiral Massera twice each, at least. However, he had no recollection of who or how these meetings got arranged. And bizarrely, he claimed during those proceedings that Fathers Jalix and Yorio had never accused him of anything. The concept of clerical privilege runs throughout this whole sordid saga. We know about Fathers Yorio and Jalix because they were priests, because they were high-profile priests. They got released because of that reason. A dozen of their young lay activists, many of them teenage girls, one of whom was the daughter of a prominent cabinet minister in the previous government, they disappeared into the night. You know, the death squads took them off. You know, you could use your imagination as to what happened to them. The real takeaway point here is that it was Pope Francis who pointed his inquisitorial finger at these people, including these teenage anti-poverty activists, knowing full well what the death squads were going to do to them. Bergoglio took the name Francis to honor Francis of Assisi, who is now recognized as the patron saint of ecologists, even though, of course, ecology did not exist when Francis of Assisi was alive. This encyclical, Laudato Si, was the first and major work of Pope Francis to date. It is the first, you know, full-blown endorsement of environmentalism by a pope. It's not the first time a pope has, at least in passing, praised environmentalism. As this encyclical points out, Pope Paul VI had called for, you know, had warned of ecological catastrophes, and John Paul II had explicitly called for a global ecological conversion. Benedict XVI had called for economic models that respected the environment. But this is the first entire encyclical devoted to this. There were also, over the years, numerous ultra-environmentalist statements coming out of various bishops' conferences. There's 20 such statements quoted in this encyclical. I'll give you one example. This is from the 2007 Latin American Bishops' Conference. We can feel the desertification of the soil almost as though it's a physical ailment of their own bodies. And we can feel the extinction of a species as a painful disfigurement. Of course, Pope Francis adds to this sort of purple prose. I'll give you a few examples of statements that come out of Laudato Si so you can get a sense of it. This sister, Mother Earth, now cries out to us because of the harm we have inflicted upon her. We have come to see ourselves as her lords and masters, entitled to plunder her. This is why the earth herself, burdened and laid waste, groans in travail. Doomsday predictions can no longer be met with irony. Consumption, waste, and environmental change has so stretched the planet's capacity that our contemporary lifestyle, unsustainable as it is, can only precipitate catastrophes. Earth is now an immense pile of filth. The encyclical's litany of eco-myths reads like a Greenpeace brochure. In addition to the ones mentioned above, there's deforestation, ocean acidification, disappearing fresh water supplies, devastating urbanization, genetically modified foods, etc. The encyclical quotes from the Earth Charter and the Rio Declaration as though they were sacred documents of some type. 4 separate paragraphs are devoted to praising the great deeds of major environmental NGOs like the World Wildlife Fund. A confluence of theistic and deep ecology jargon floats this flim-flam beyond reason's reach. Add to that the pervasive, bitter, angry tone of this document, and you're left holding an eco-manifesto worthy of Earth First or Earth Liberation Front. It is extremist even by environmentalist standards. Climate change is given one subchapter and several other mentions in the document. The encyclical was timed to influence the 2015 Paris climate talks. Pope Francis is quite adamant that the catastrophic, anthropogenic, global warming hypothesis is settled science. The encyclical predictably trashes the profit system, the market system, consumerism, economic growth, all the standard, tenets of corporatist economics. The encyclical repeats the word integral almost on every page. The specific phrase integral ecology is the title of the core chapter of the document, and it appears 9 other times in the document. Integral ecology. Integralism, loosely, is sort of to Catholicism what fundamentalism is to Protestantism. The difference being is that in Catholicism, the encyclicals, etc., are as much a part of the sacred documents as is the Bible. In the 1920s, Mediterranean Catholic Europe, the term integralism was pretty much a synonym for fascism. It reflected an opposition or a hostility to all forms of modernity. It was a staunch defense of all existing forms of hierarchy, and there was a strong Catholic supremacist theme running through it. In the 1930s, the integralists were a mass political movement. They were the Brazilian Integralist Party. They peaked at 1 million members. They were obvious knockoffs of the brown shirts and the black shirts. They wore monochrome green shirts with Sigma armbands. They engaged in all sorts of street fighting and intimidation and terrorism against the left and against the labor movement, etc. There was no confusing who they were. This was clearly the Brazilian fascist movement. However, they were known at the time by their own name, which was the Integralists. This, of course, spills over into Argentina, where integralism once again meant full-blown corporatism. It meant, fusing all the competing factions of society into this harmonious, integral whole under the paternal supervision of the Argentine Bishops' Conference. That is what integralism would have meant when Jorge was a young lad. Hence, if you return to the phrase integral ecology, which is repeated throughout this book, and it should have been the title of the book, certainly was the title of the key chapter, integral ecology more or less translates into eco-fascism. The encyclical recommends more environmental regulations, more environmental impact statements, assessments, and more renewable energy, a lot more. The Catholic masses must be converted into good eco-consumers. The Catholic masses must be converted into good eco-citizens that vote for ecological parties and that welcome strict eco-laws. The Catholic Church must double down on its eco-educational programs. Catholic-run educational facilities should emphasize simplistic lifestyles and environmental defense. That front is important because the Catholic Church retains a lot of influence in the world's education system. There's probably 24 countries where at least some of the elementary schools and secondary schools are still run by the Catholic Church. Canada is one of them. What people don't know is that the Catholic Church still owns 1,358 institutes of higher education. Granted, most of those are small colleges devoted to priestly training, and at least within the English-speaking world, a lot of what were Catholic universities have been transferred mainly, it's always vague, but mainly to secular management. That said, there remain dozens of multi-faculty, large, modern universities in Europe, in Latin America, that are completely within the Cardinal's grasp. I would estimate there's probably 40,000 university professors out there who should be numbered amongst the Pope's legions. And these people are teaching a wide variety of subjects, including the sciences. So the ability of the Church to influence science is a real phenomenon. Finally, a word about motive. What is motivating the Catholic Church to forge this allegiance with the international environmental movement, which, as the encyclical points out, is a program that's been going on for some time. The Catholic Church does not sink or swim based on the amount of coins that are dropped in collection plates on Sunday mornings. They receive a lot of money from governments around the world, about 24 governments, for running various social services programs and educational programs pursuant to various treaties or concordats that the Vatican State has with those governments. That is one major source of sustenance. A more important one is the fact that the Catholic Church is the world's largest private landlord, if indeed you want to define it as a private organization. In Italy alone, and I'm not talking about within the city-state of the Vatican, in Italy, the Catholic Church owns apartment blocks and football stadiums and marinas worth an estimated $100 billion, nobody knows outside of the church what that number would actually be. That array of land holdings is probably equal to or exceeded by the amount of land they own in Spain, France, and these other countries taken as a collectivity, southern Germany. Those land holdings would be dwarfed by the land holdings that they have in Latin America, from the Rio Grande all the way to Tierra del Fuego. They used to own a lot more. The Catholic Church used to own a third of all the land in Europe. They used to own a lot of land in South America and Europe. They've lost a lot, but they have retained some very lucrative crumbs. And I'm not talking about the land upon which the churches sit. I'm talking about this immense portfolio of commercial, residential, agricultural, revenue-generating properties. If one has come to the awareness that the environmental movement is primarily a newfangled form of the land conservation movement, and that its nucleus is really the commercial landowners or the wealthy landowners of the Western world, who are seeking to, through a whole series of land use programs and wilderness set-asides and massive parks, restrict the amount of land available for development so as to elevate the value of the developed lands that they personally own, then one understands why it is the Catholic Church is such a natural ally for the international environmental movement. They've never been able to come to agreement on the issue of population control. The international environmental movement are great promoters of abortion and contraception and compulsory sterilization. Those are things that the Catholic Church will not sign off on. However, when it comes to the issue of a corporatist land strategy, a highly restrictive land strategy, the Church and the international environmental movement are consensus ad item. Parson and landlord, hand in hand, always did they go. Now, you can get more information on that at www.ecofascism.com, in particular as regards to what you've just heard, the article titled Jorge Bergoglio's Green Encyclical.